What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting into this story, one of the questions that I've been seeing is because the entity of the Black Lantern Corps is a being named Necron, one of the things people ask is Necron the same as like the other entities like Parallax and so on and so forth? The more I started thinking about that, the more that got me thinking, well, why not create an explanation on the emotional spectrum? Now, we are going to talk about what happens in this video, but this video centers on Superman becoming the host for Parallax. But what I want to do is I want to throw in the emotional spectrum explanation of this. And we're actually going to put it in with the videos that we have in our playlist on Green Lantern. That way you guys who are just kind of jumping into the playlist will get an explanation of the emotional spectrum as well as, this cool little story that takes place in DC Comics. So the emotional spectrum is one of the oldest things in existence, right? Like it's a span of emotions. It's basically the core emotions that every sentient being feels. And the idea here is that the emotional spectrum consists of rage and greed and fear and willpower and hope and compassion, love, death, life. It's this idea that it basically encompasses everything that makes a being who they are. Now, the idea is that, again, every sentient being across the universe feels emotions, and those emotions funnel directly into the emotional spectrum itself. So as time progresses and as enough of those emotions begin to grow, as the sentience of the universe increases, those emotions begin to come together and they begin to coalesce in sorts. And so what this means is that in each part of the emotional spectrum, there is an entity that represents that spectrum. In this instance, in this story, it's the entity of Parallax. Now, Parallax is literally the living embodiment of fear. But the idea here is that with the Parallax concept, he's waxed and waned over the years. When it came to the Green Lantern mythos in terms of how it's been adjusted over the years, which is to say the changes that have been made and how it stands in the modern day, how Jordan took off into space, he was on a mission, he came back, found out Coast City had been destroyed by Cyborg Superman, and this left him open. And so he was possessed by the Parallax entity, and then started calling himself Parallax, and then went on a crusade, killed all the Green Lanterns, yada, yada, yada. But what we're gonna see on Sundays in our Green Lantern videos is we'll see that these entities will start popping up. The Red Lantern entity is the Butcher, for example. The Whale is the representation of willpower in the DC universe. Each one of these entities is basically an amalgamation of that power. I wanted to throw that out there because I wanted to make sure people understood how the emotional spectrum works. Again, it's basically just this idea that so long as there are beings in the universe that will feel fear, that will feel rage and compassion and, love and all the different emotions that we ran over earlier, then the emotional spectrum will exist. Now, having said that, when it comes to this particular story, the cool thing is that what this does is it initially just picks up with a young kid. And this kid's just kind of, going through and exploring and actually looking at the future home for the LexCorp Gardens, which basically looks like it was a former school at one point and it's been torn down ever since. But what this initially does is it basically comes to us and shows us that a lot of these kids around this town have basically gone missing. Now, again, this is the cool thing about Superman Rebirth, and this is what I love about Superman Rebirth so much, is it takes Superman back to his roots. In DC Comics, when it came to the New 52, a lot of emphasis was put on that version of Superman being the one who deals with like these huge conflicts and things like that. You got stories where he dealt with small things, but by and large, it was just one major event after another. And the result is that we didn't get a whole lot of instances where we got these points to see Superman dealing with the small guys. But this reborn Superman, this classic Superman basically in DC Rebirth, this is the one that we're most familiar with. This is the one who's just as likely to deal with, some massive planet-wide calamity as he is to like help a lady cross the street. They're equally as important to him. And so in this instance, parents showing up and saying our kids are missing, it's Superman basically come along and saying, fine, then I'll help you guys find them. I'm Superman. I'm here to protect everybody, large and small. I will do the best I can to help try to track down your kids and see what's going on. Now, of course, what we end up finding out is that the reason why these kids are vanishing is because these kids, one of them anyway, is being possessed by the Parallax entity. And what ends up happening is that where Superman basically tracks this kid down, where he realizes that it seems to be Parallax but isn't 100% sure, this kid starts talking about things like fear. I know what you're afraid of, this and this and that and that. Now, that's what makes Parallax so dangerous, is because remember, people don't willingly feed Parallax. It's not like Superman can sit down and say, oh man, dude, I'm scared. Man, I better not feel fear. Otherwise I could make Parallax stronger. But Parallax, being the living embodiment of fear, knows what everyone is afraid of. And that's what makes him so dangerous, is because with enough fear, if you're afraid of enough things, if he shows you enough of your worst nightmares, then if your willpower is not strong enough like the Green Lanterns, then ultimately you'll end up falling prey to the nature of Parallax himself. And so that's what ends up happening, is Superman is possessed by Parallax. And that's why this is so crazy is because he doesn't immediately know it. Now, the reason why this matters is because this is how it was with Hal Jordan. When Hal Jordan first became Parallax, it wasn't like a sudden, shift. It was a gradual thing. It was one day he woke up and realized that he had gray hair. He had gray stripes along the side of his head. He would just have this feeling of discontent. He would feel like something's not right. It was an itch that he couldn't scratch. He couldn't really figure it out. But in this instance where Superman is possessed by Parallax, it literally takes hold of him in its entirety. Now remember, this is classic Superman, so it's not like he's unfamiliar. He knows exactly who Parallax is, and Superman knows exactly how dangerous Parallax is. Now, with Superman basically being taken over by the Parallax entity, once he's a host to it, it immediately conquers him. And the reason for this is because Superman is not like Hal Jordan. Superman's strong, Superman's capable, he's got a lot to live for, but it would be like me coming to you and saying, hey, here's schematics for like a skyscraper that I want you to build, now build it. You would have no idea, you wouldn't know how to cope, you would be inexperienced with it. And that's how it is with Superman. The reason why Superman doesn't wield a Green Lantern ring is because most likely he may not have the willpower to be able to do it, because what you're talking about doing is keeping fear at bay 100% of the time. When it comes to Hal Jordan, it's basically just him. He's got friends, but he doesn't have any kids. He doesn't have a family or anything like that. Superman has a wife. He's got a son. He's looking to the future. He's looking to return to what he believes himself to be, the superhero of Metropolis as he remembered being from his classic DC universe. And so because of all this, it's this idea that when he's taken over by the Parallax entity, it makes sense because it's far easier to instill fear in Superman than it is in Hal Jordan, because Superman has a lot more to lose than Hal Jordan. Now, of course, what this does is with Superman becoming Parallax, he's immediately met by the arrival of Sinestro. Now, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the Fractured story from Green Lantern Corps. For those of you guys who didn't get a chance to see that video, Fractured wasn't the most important story. I mean, it basically dealt with the aftermath of the death of Sinestro during the first story arc of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps Rebirth. What we ended up finding out is that from the time that we saw Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps with Sinestro's Law, all the way up until the Fractured story and Sinestro was gone, we had his Lantern Corps working alongside the Green Lanterns. Now, of course, there was a rift, hence the reason why the story was called Fractured. They ended up going their own separate ways. But at the end of the Fractured story, we basically found out that Sinestro was alive. Now, Sinestro and Parallax go hand in hand. They are like peas and carrots. They are two peas in a pod, and it works because where Parallax goes, Sinestro goes. The other half of this equation comes in the form of Parallax himself. Just because Parallax is the living embodiment of fear does not mean that Parallax controls fear. Parallax simply just knows what people are afraid of. Now, Parallax can manipulate, the element of fear, but Parallax is simply just an entity. He's a harbinger of fear itself. And so when Sinestro and the Yellow Lanterns tap into the emotional spectrum, they're half tapping into the power of Parallax by extension of the fact that they're tapping into fear. The reason why this matters is because there came a point when Parallax was actually enslaved by Sinestro and used as essentially a battery source for the Sinestro Corps itself. And that's why this is so important, is because this is not necessarily a battle between Sinestro and Superman. This is a battle between Parallax and Sinestro. It's basically Parallax simply arguing, you are not going to enslave me again. Now, for Sinestro, Parallax is really the only way he can go back to the way he used to be. It allowed him to reach the height of his power when it came to the Sinestro Corps. If he were to simply back off and he were to just going back to tapping into the emotional spectrum, there's probably no way he'd be able to defeat Hal Jordan, just because right now in the stories, Hal Jordan is willpower itself. And so in this instance, what this does is it creates a showdown of sorts, in the sense that we get this really, really cool moment where Sinestro is able to basically overcome Parallax as he possesses Superman using the Weaponers of Kord. Now, of course, the Weaponers of Kord come from the Antimatter universe. They're a huge part of the Green Lantern mythos, and they've been around ever since Sinestro was first introduced in DC Comics way back in like the 1950s or 1960s. And the idea is that the Weaponers were the ones who actually created the Sinestro Corps rings for Sinestro himself. But they're more of a group who were viewed to be warriors, but have since been turned into what amounts to slaves, more or less, for Sinestro. But the cool thing is that looking at Superman and using his power, Sinestro begins to look at what terrifies Superman so much. And this is why I give this video the title, Will Superboy Kill Superman? Because when it comes to things like this, DC uses these scenarios to basically give us a glimpse at future stories, to say, here is the direction things are going to be going in later on down the line, or a potential future for a particular character. And in fact, We know there's going to be a story coming out in December, or at least Benny over Comic Historian pointed it out to me. There's a story coming out in December where it's basically going to be Superman traveling to the future to try to stop Superboy from becoming a bad guy. The theory that Comic Historian has, and the theory that I agree with, is that the son of Superman will become Superboy Prime, because in this scenario, in this glimpse into the fear that Superman has, he's literally killed by his son. He's murdered by his own son. And that begs the question, will that happen? But again, it's DC basically saying, hey guys, like, here's a glimpse of a story that you might see later on down the line. You probably will see Superman fighting his own son and his son killing him. So that's why these things are kind of cool. But more so than that, this is one of the biggest fears that Superman has, because remember, when it came to him and his character, when it came to Superman and it came to the idea of his son developing powers, the goal was to basically nurture the abilities of his son and nurture the upbringing of his son in such a way that when the time came, when his powers began to manifest, and when he was at this crossroads where he knew what he was capable of, and he was choosing the road of being a good guy or being a bad guy, without question, he would choose the road of a good guy and eventually become a hero just like his father. The fear of Superman is that there will be hesitation. The fear of Superman is that there will be a moment of weakness, and in that moment of weakness, his son will kill all the superheroes, the Flash, Batman, so on and so forth, and then turn around and kill Superman. It shows us what Superman fears the most: failing, letting people down, not being there to save somebody in the nick of time. That's the core of Superman. Superman is a good guy in every ounce of the word, does everything he can. The problem with this is that Parallax, because it's trying to escape Superman, starts jumping ship, jumping from one host body to another, to Lysa Drac, who's basically this woman that's kind of like the chronicler of the Sinestro Corps. It starts jumping from body to body, the different weaponers of Cord, taking possession of him, and every step along the way, Sinestro's chasing after it. And that's why this is so cool, because what does it say when the living embodiment of fear is terrified of someone? That shows us just how capable and evil Sinestro really is. But at the moment, the goal of Sinestro is basically, to attempt to try to take down Parallax, to reacquire him and reaching this peak level of power. Of course, Superman's able to jump into the way after making his escape, and then in turn takes the ring of Sinestro and actually imprisons Parallax inside of it, and then takes the ring with him. When it comes to Parallax, because of the fact that Parallax is a living embodiment of fear, the fear emotional spectrum still exists. It's still there, and Sinestro's forces will still be able to tap into it. But what it does do is it takes away the ability for Sinestro to be as powerful as he was before. They basically just kind of reduce his power. And so because of that, Superman reaches out to these weaponers. And that again is the other half of why Superman is so cool. Superman is a living embodiment of hope. Superman is a person that basically implements this idea that people will always look to the brighter future. And in that hope, the possibility exists that their life can get better. And that's what he says to the weaponers of Cord. He says, look, you guys have been made to feel fear by Sinestro. You guys were literally enslaved, but I hear that you guys are warriors. I hear that you guys are proud and capable warriors. And so my biggest question is this: why are you serving Sinestro? Leave. Form your own role. Become your own heroes. Choose what direction your life will go in from this day forward. And so again, what this seems to do is basically start closing off all these doors to Sinestro. His ability to restore to 100% absolute power as possessing the Parallax entity is now gone, because it's in the ring that's held by Superman. The ability for the weaponers of Cord to basically serve as these guys that give Sinestro everything he needs is essentially beginning to go away. As this begins to wrap up, what it does is it actually has Superman taking this moment to watch his son sleep. And the reason why is because we look at Superboy right now in DC Rebirth and we say this is a kid who's young, he's vibrant, he's learning his powers, but then we ask the question, but what if what Superman saw, his biggest fear, comes true? What if it comes to the point where Superboy looks around and says, you were never there as a dad. You were off fighting alongside Batman and you were just out saving the day all the time, and I was just left to kind of raise myself, or with mom doing the best she could. You were basically an absentee dad. And in that anger, in that rage, Superboy becomes a bad guy. So again, that's why this is so cool, is because it gives us this possibility that not all that glitters is gold, that maybe, just maybe, as unlikely as it may seem, as impossible as it may seem, that perhaps there's a possibility out there that Superboy, the son of Superman, will become a villain and will kill his father. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.